The rising cost of food is top of mind for many Canadians and for food banks, which say they've reached their breaking point.
We have seen an escalating number of individuals who have full-time employment. Their primary source of income is from employment, and that has gone from some 13 to 15% of food bank clients up to about 35% of client visits. So it doesn't, those on fixed income were already squeezed. They were already coming to the food bank. Now we're adding a whole new segment of individuals who just can't make ends meet.
Jim Stanford is an economist and director of the Center for Future Work, and he's done a lot of analysis on the price of food. Jim, it's good to talk to you again.
Thank you, David.
So food prices are sky high, but the Canada Food Price Report for 2023 came out last week saying they're going to go up even higher this year. An average family of four will spend over $1,000 more than last year. Is this justified? Is there gouging happening here by grocery chains? What's your take on these increases?
Yeah, food price inflation is now way worse than the overall problem of inflation. In fact, food prices are growing twice as fast as other consumer prices, over 10% over the last 12 months. And there's no sign they're slowing down either. In fact, in the last 3-month period, they've grown at an annualized rate of 13%. So that number of an extra $1,000 a year on groceries for a typical family might even be conservative. All kinds of factors, David, contributing to higher food prices, some of them well beyond our control. Obviously, global developments, climate change shocks that we've seen in agricultural areas around the world, the war in Ukraine. Some of it, though, is clearly resulting from companies both at the retail stage and the food manufacturing stage taking advantage of this moment to fatten their own profit margins. They're making record profits in both food processing and in the supermarkets, as you know, and that has certainly worsened the food problem that Canadians are experiencing.
Well, what share of that is the problem? Do you know what I mean? Like if it's up over 10% for food, 13% for food, how much of that is excess profit taking in your view by retailers and processors, and how much of that is there's a war in Ukraine, there's droughts in agricultural belts, and avian flu wiped out a bunch of chicken?
Yeah, well, it's very hard to, disassemble it all the way along the supply chain. So think about it. Part of the problem starts in the energy industry. You know that agriculture is an energy-intensive industry. They pay a lot for higher fuel prices, which have translated into enormous profits in the energy industry. Then you've got the food processors themselves who've added their own profit margin. Transportation is another industry where companies have taken advantage of the supply shocks after the pandemic to fatten their own profit margins. And then you've got the supermarkets themselves. Supermarket profits have more than doubled since before the pandemic, and they're staying high even though Canadians are literally buying less groceries because they can't afford it. Yet the profits are still enormous. So at every step along the way, you've seen companies take advantage of the crisis of the pandemic and everything that came after it to make money while the sun was shining, and we're paying for it quite significantly. This is more of a profit price spiral that we're seeing in Canada, not the wage price spiral of the 1970s, but a problem where companies in a whole range of industries have really taken advantage of the vulnerability of Canadians to increase their profits.
So what's the policy solution to this? I know the New Democrats talk about a tax on excess profit for grocery stores. Is there some sort of a policy intervention that governments at various levels can do here to help ease this crunch?
Yeah, I think there's a range of measures. In some cases, price caps would make a lot of sense. In the initial surge in energy prices, it's not at all clear that we should actually see such dramatic increases in energy prices that then cascaded through the whole supply chain of the economy. We regulate some energy prices, we could have regulated more. Excess profit taxes on companies like the energy companies, the banks, the supermarkets who have generated record profits through this crisis would help, and then redistribute those funds to help Canadians pay for their groceries. At the end of the day, David, there's no magic wand that you can wave, but at least we need to be honest about what's causing this problem. And so far in this inflationary episode, the dominant narrative has been too many Canadians are working and they're making too much money. This is why we have inflation. That is the explicit storyline from the Bank of Canada. And it makes no sense at all, especially in regards to food prices. If you went down to the parking lot at Loblaws and told people who just paid $200 for a cart of groceries, you know why it's so expensive? Because too many of you are working and your wages are too high. They'd chase you out of the lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Bank of Canada's monetary policy, the headline inflation numbers have come down. It's responded to it, but food prices are staying high because it's not something that monetary policy can fix. Like, as I said, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, grain and wheat, droughts in the agricultural sector in the U.S. So, but given that, we are going to get another policy announcement from the Bank of Canada this week, right? So when they look at this and see the downward trajectory of headline inflation, but prices remaining stubbornly high for rent, for housing, for food, how do you think the bank factors that into whatever they decide on Wednesday?
Yeah, it's a tough call for them. The overall rate of inflation has dropped quite substantially. In fact, that 5.2% growth over the last year is actually higher than what's actually happening right now. Over the last 3 months, it's more like 1 or 2% at an annualized rate. So on the overall number, it's good news. On the other hand, there are clearly key factors at work in the overall inflationary problem, like food, that aren't the least bit sensitive to domestic interest rates. And this is where I think the Bank of Canada's narrative from the beginning has been off base. Inflation has come down, not because of domestic interest rate hikes, but because of things like the moderation in world energy prices, the repair of supply chains after the lockdowns, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that the bank, says, yeah, food price inflation is a big problem, but our interest rate hikes aren't going to make it any better. And in fact, they'll make the pain worse for many Canadian households. So then they'll hold off on another interest rate hike.
It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it, that inflation seems to be abating and it's coming down, yet affordability, which is usually the knock-on effect of inflation, remains a real problem. When you look at the food shock that's caused by all of these external factors, and then the monetary policy hitting people on variable mortgages and then that being passed on to renters, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this in recent years.
Oh, you're absolutely right, David. In fact, this even exacerbates the unfairness of the current inflation because it is in the prices of necessities, food and shelter, in particular energy, where inflation remains stubborn and painful. And those are the things that lower income people have to spend more of their budget on. So if anything, the inflation that's experienced by low income people is worse than the overall number makes it seem. Yet they are hit disproportionately by higher interest rates and the decline in real earnings that workers in Canada have experienced. So it's doubly unfair in that sense.
Jim Stanford, always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, David.